Hello everyone! So I am sitting here with Sarena Ulibarri, who is the editor-in-chief of Worldweaver Press, and we have a lot of exciting stuff to talk about, most specifically a Kickstarter campaign for probably the definitive anthology for Solarpunk, but first let's give a little bit of background to everybody. Who is Worldweaver Press and what kinds of things do they typically publish in? Who Sarena is as well. Why don't we first talk about you? What was your background that got you into science fiction and fantasy and put you in the path of Worldweaver?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a science fiction fantasy fan. I remember finding my mom's old, like, Edgar Rice Burroughs books in the basement and just reading those all when I was, like, 7, 8. Yeah. So I've always been in love with science fiction and fantasy. I was an English major at University of New Mexico, and science fiction and fantasy wasn't allowed there. We had to learn how to write the literary stuff, which was useful, but it was great to come back around to it. I did an MFA at University of Colorado, which was much more speculative friendly. We had Stephen Graham Jones there, who writes horror and fantasy, and so I kind of got back into it there. Found out about Clarion, applied to that right after I graduated from my MFA. Met a ton of fantastic people through Clarion. Yeah. And then ended up moving down here. I think we met at Mile High Con in Denver, actually.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I was already down here, so. Yeah.
When you moved down here, did you immediately start working for Worldweaver, or?
Pretty soon after I moved here, yeah. And they were based in Michigan at the time. The editor-in-chief was in Michigan, and I followed the press for a couple of years before that, and I'd read a couple of their books, really liked what they were doing, and saw the call for assistant editors and applied to it, got accepted, and then transitioned to being editor-in-chief just about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and you basically brought Worldweaver down here to New Mexico.
Yeah, and our editors are still all over the place. We have one in Canada, one in Kentucky, one in California, but we just do everything through the computer. Yeah. So.
And what kinds of things does Worldweaver tend to publish?
We do fantasy, science fiction, paranormal romance, and we tend to do stuff that's more lighthearted, more fun, at least have happy endings, even if sometimes the way to get there isn't quite so happy. But we tend slightly toward the lighter side of the science fiction fantasy world.
Yeah, you've published the only Vampire Beach read that I've ever heard of.
By somebody, Sarah W. Bauer, Vampire Beach read, Vampire Chicklet. It's a ton of fun. It's hilarious. Foul-mouthed vampires drinking rum and blood on a Florida night beach. Yeah.
And watch this space, because right now Worldweaver is closed to subs, but they will open to subs in the relatively near future, and we will post when that happens. There's a lot of small presses out there, and those of us that work in the industry know a ton of small presses. Yours is one that I wholeheartedly recommend, because there are some scams out there. But Worldweaver, for one thing, you guys always apply to get a Publisher's Weekly review for every book that you publish, and lately you've pretty much always gotten the Publisher's Weekly reviews. So, authors that work with you have that, right, even before their book hits the press. And then you've really done a lot with the marketing.
Well, we try to.
Yeah. But, a lot of small presses don't. There's a lot of small presses that are mainly about being able to say that you've been published. Some will even charge you up front. Those are always a scam.
Always.
Worldweaver is legit.
You are best with publicity. We send out a ton of review copies, and we send them out, and it's up to the review venue whether they pay attention to us or not. But you're right. With our recent books, we have been able to get Publishers Weekly reviews and a few other pretty big ones. And sometimes we've gotten some pretty big author blurbs too. Like we had Terry Bisson gave us a blurb for Murder in the Generative Kitchen. Like, that was great. Yeah. So, but yeah, my focus on publicity is getting reviews. Right. And whether it's big magazine reviews, or whether it's just Amazon reviews, I think that's one of the major thing that sells a small press book, because a small press, an unknown author from a small press, like, a reader doesn't necessarily know who they are or why they should spend their money on it, and if they see other people endorsing it, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And another thing that you guys do is you do awesome covers, and you want to show the cover of the next book that you have coming out.
Yeah. So this is Son of a Witch. This is an anthology. 6 stories, humorous fantasy stories of magic spells gone wrong. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And so that will be coming out
October 3rd.
Great.
Yeah.
You are also going to bring Solarpunk to the Northern Hemisphere in a big way. So why don't we first talk about like what Solarpunk is, because there's 85 gazillion punks out there, subgenres of punk. Yeah. And most punks are fictitious pasts, like steampunk and clockpunk. Solarpunk's a little bit different, so do you want to sort of, can you encapsulate in a couple sentences what Solarpunk is?
Well, I can try. So it is in some ways a reaction to cyberpunk, which is futuristic,
Yes.
rather than the retro futuristic like
Right.
steampunk. But cyberpunk is often dystopian.
Yes.
I think it doesn't have to be, but it's often dystopian,
Right.
and Solarpunk is kind of a reaction against all the visions of dark futures. Solarpunk is a future that you might actually want to live in. It's a world that's run on renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, things like that, that will create a cleaner atmosphere for the world, and it's optimistic. It's hopeful. I think that's the core of Solarpunk. It's a hopeful future. It's a green future, one where we haven't destroyed ourselves.
Right.
One where there isn't an oppressive government that's controlling your life, as there often is in cyberpunk.
Right.
So that's really what Solarpunk is about. It's not necessarily a new idea. The term is fairly new, and the term was coined by several different people all around the same time. So the Brazilian Solarpunk anthology that we're doing was one instance, but there were several people that were also playing around with the same idea, and it's become an aesthetic as well. And I think that's part of what happens with any of the punk genres. Cyberpunk has a very distinct aesthetic.
Right.
Steampunk has a very distinct aesthetic. Solarpunk is developing almost more as an aesthetic than it is necessarily as a genre right now.
Right. Which is right up with steampunk in that kind of development. What kinds of conflicts do you typically tend to see in a Solarpunk? Do they tend to be focused around the technology, or do they just tend to be more of the human condition kind of problems?
I mean, it can go either way. I mean, you can definitely have interpersonal conflicts in a Solarpunk world, and you can also have things that are around either the technology or just ideas of climate change. So, for example, one book that I think is definitely Solarpunk is Kim Stanley Robinson's New York 2140. He's not calling it that, but it absolutely has every bit of what we're looking for in Solarpunk. So, and there are tons of good conflicts in that because there are like 18 different characters that we're all following. But
Right.
But a lot of the conflict there comes from the fact that the sea levels have risen. New York is still there, but the streets are rivers. You know, it's in modern day Venice.
Right.
And so some of the conflicts come from the fact that the skyscrapers are there, but their bases are being eroded by the water. And so Solarpunk can often be these like man versus nature kind of conflicts.
Sure.
And just looking at possibilities of climate change, there's often extreme weather events.
Right.
And with Cli-Fi often, which is very similar to Solarpunk, but often more the dystopian.
Right.
Those man versus nature things are often apocalyptic or just devastating. And in Solarpunk, we're looking at ways that we adapt to that, ways that we may be, nature may be eroding on us, but we're going to learn how to harmonize with that. We're going to learn how to adapt to it. Not conquer it, but adapt to it.
Right. And a lot of people think of science fiction and fantasy as a primarily anglophonic, I don't know what you say. Most of the big movers and shakers in science fiction and fantasy have been English speaking in the United States or the UK. That's not entirely fair. There have been major authors from elsewhere, but there is certainly this perception that it is centered on the English speaking world. Brazil, though, has started to really assert itself. The 3% is on Netflix and is trending very strongly, and that's a Brazilian dystopia. And then the Solarpunk anthology also started in Brazil. So do you want to talk a little bit about like Solarpunk and how it developed in Brazil, or do you have any much of the backstory there?
Yeah, I have a little bit, and I'm going to post an interview with the editor that talks a little bit more about this as we get deeper into the campaign. But they had done they had done a triptych of anthologies. The first one was steampunk. They called it vaporpunk. And the second one was dieselpunk. And then they wanted to do one that was they first called it green punk. So they had this idea of looking at three different sort of views of the world. And so they did the Solarpunk as almost what's the word, like an antidote, but
yeah, kind of the antithesis.
Antithesis.
Yeah.
So they did the Solarpunk kind of as an antithesis to these, steampunk being very industrial revolution, and then dieselpunk being very fossil fuel, and, smog oriented, and so they wanted to see a world without those kind of things. So that was kind of the genesis for that. But Brazil, I don't remember the exact percentage, but a huge percent of energy in Brazil right now comes from renewable energy.
Yes.
They're one of the leaders of the world.
Right, which isn't necessarily known. I mean, the United States, I'm glad that we are constantly facing up to our own problems, but that means we are kind of broadcasting them at top volume at all times, and we often don't hear, like, anything happening elsewhere in the world. But yeah, Brazil is a renewable energy leader. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point about a lot of science fiction coming from the English-speaking world, I think a lot of Solarpunk is going to come either from outside of that, or at least be inspired by it, because we can't necessarily look to our own, situation right now as inspiration for that. I mean, there's definitely strides being taken in renewable energy here, but there are other countries that are doing a lot more with it.
Right.
A whole lot more.
Right, yeah. And there are, very healthy artistic communities, writing communities, movements happening outside of the Anglophone world, but we often just don't hear about them because a lot of us are monolingual and we just don't read outside of the English language. But so this Solarpunk anthology, though, is fairly exciting because it actually made a pretty big splash down in Brazil when it came out. And do you want to talk about how it was that you were then able to get the rights for it? Because that's kind of a coup for World Weaver Press to be able to do that.
It is, yeah. Well, it started as a Twitter conversation. Honestly, I was tweeting about that Kim Stanley Robinson book that I mentioned, and it was an editor from Italy, actually, who came onto my feed and said, hey, there are other people doing this. He's not the first. And I said, and he pointed me to this Brazilian Solarpunk anthology, and I'd come across this before, but it's in Portuguese, so I'd never really thought a whole lot about it, and it just, I don't know, it was this like light bulb where it was like, I own a publishing company now,
right?
And we're fairly stable now, and I just wonder what would it take to get the rights for that. So so I started talking to this guy a little bit more. He knew the editors in Brazil. Even though he's in Italy, he'd worked with them on some other project and had interviewed the editor before. So he put me in contact. I just said, hey, I'd love to talk to them about the English rights. Just find out what it is. So he put me in contact with them. And it was really only a couple days that I said, can we do this, and what would it take? And the Brazilian publishing house was actually very open to it. They're very excited about it. We hashed out the terms and made sure we had a contract and all that. But and the biggest thing was finding a translator, because I don't speak Portuguese, and nobody on the World Weaver Press team does.
And you need some more than just somebody who knows Portuguese.
Right. Yeah, somebody who is actually an adept translator. So I dug around my contact list a little bit, and I came across Fabio Fernandes, who's a Clarion West graduate, lives in Brazil, has worked with this publishing house before, and is a translator. So it just all lined up.
That's perfect.
And
because
I contacted him and said, "Do you want to do this?" And he was like, "Yeah."
And that's great because the translator almost becomes a co-author to a certain
Yes,
extent.
absolutely.
It's more than just getting the words across; it's getting the concepts and the ideas and the feel and the atmosphere and all of those things. And so,
Oh sure, if it was just the words, I could run it through Google Translate.
Yeah, right.
But and I used Google Translate to just to kind of look at the stories because I took on this thing sight unseen. I hadn't read the stories.
Right.
So I kind of put I found the look inside on Amazon or whatever and kind of ran through Google Translate just to see what are these about.
Right. Yeah.
It was the translation was good enough that I could kind of get what it was about, but it's not good enough.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Unless you want to go for some kind of abstract vibe, which we're definitely not going for.
No.
But this is exciting because Solarpunk is just kind of in its infancy in the Northern Hemisphere, and so the chance to bring something that was kind of a landmark, landmark piece in the creation of Solarpunk, to be able to be the one to bring it to the Northern Hemisphere is a fairly big deal.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
And so, Worldweaver being a small press, and you nevertheless wanting to be able to pay a fair price to get all the rights and everything for this, you're going to do this Kickstarter campaign that launches today. And why don't you talk a little bit about that?
All right.
Well, first, how much are you asking for?
Our baseline is $2,500.
Okay.
Which is actually a lot less than it's all going to cost, but it's enough to supplement us that we're, that won't turn our small press budget upside down.
Because you definitely want to get this done, even if you can't have one of those Kickstarter campaigns that blows up.
Right. And we are doing stretch goals to try to fund a new Solarpunk anthology that I'm going to edit. And we want to be able to pay our writers a little bit more than we normally do for Worldweaver Press anthologies. So those are our stretch goals. But our initial goal is $2,500. That'll help me pay the translator and get this book, produced in the way that it needs to be.
Right.
So it runs for a month. It'll end on September 14th. And
what kinds of rewards are you guys offering?
We have the book, of course, an ebook and paperback.
So in a way, Kickstarter can also work like pre-order.
Yeah.
So if you absolutely want to be one of the first to pre-order, donate to the Kickstarter.
Right, and we're actually doing it so that the Kickstarter backers will get it before it's available for sale. So by a couple months. So with Kickstarter backers will start to get it at the same time we're sending it out to reviewers. So a couple months before it's on Amazon.
Right.
But yeah, so we're doing the book. We're also doing a science fiction 6-pack of the other books other science fiction books that Worldweaver Press has published. So that includes anthologies like Far Orbit, which has authors like Gregory Benford and Eric Choi and people like that in it, as well as a couple of science fiction novellas. I have one of them here. Yeah. So this one
cover's not really revealed yet. So
yeah, this is super secret now.
Yeah.
It'll be revealed next week. So this is a Continuum by Wendy Nicol. This is a time travel novella that's going to be coming out in January. So we'll have all the science fiction books that we've published so far. You can get an ebook or paperback. We're also offering critiques.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a couple critiques. One of the other editors, Ron Parrish, will be offering some critiques, and Fabio is actually offering critiques in both English and Portuguese.
Nice. So just most people watching this are going to know what critiques are, but for people who don't, critiques are when somebody with a background as an editor or an author reads your piece and then gives you honest feedback about how does it work or if it works. And especially for people starting out, it took me 15 years before I had a reliable set of first readers who helped me out. So when you're starting out, stuff like this is really invaluable to be able to get a critique. And even if you are established, getting a different point of view can always help, because I love my beta readers, but it's always refreshing to get a slightly different take. Somebody's going to see things that the people who know me won't necessarily see.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we've got critiques as the reward. We also have a couple of concept consultations.
Nice.
So I happen to know an economist who works at Sandia National Labs for the Renewable Energy Department, and I asked him to do a concept consultation for. So if you're working on a Solarpunk story, but you want to know more about the economics of renewable energy, or how a post-capitalist society would work, or a socialist society would work. He can kind of walk you through that, and tell you where your ideas are, what the holes are in your idea, things like that.
Cool.
So, and we have another person who's a futurist who lives here in Albuquerque, and he's worked on Solarpunk type things since the 70s, just imagining these future worlds. So we can set up video chats or phone call or whatever works best for the backer.
Or if they happen to be in Albuquerque.
Right, yeah, or we just meet at a coffee shop in Albuquerque, that'd be great too. So, these sort of educational opportunities to try to help people that are interested in Solarpunk but are still developing their world, developing their ideas.
Yeah, because we're still in the very early days of Solarpunk, but just judging by the kind of reception that Solarpunk is already getting and our current geopolitical climate, Solarpunk is probably going to be pretty big.
It has the potential to be,
Yeah.
And I think people are reacting to the current climate in a couple different ways. Some people are really leaning more toward the dystopian, and because that feels more real to them right now, and some are really leaning away from it because it feels too real,
Right.
and are looking for alternate views of the future, and reasons to have hope.
Something to be working towards instead of something to be running from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Sarena. It's been awesome
Thank
sitting
you.
here talking to you, and best of luck on your Kickstarter campaign. We're going to put the link up, and please go donate. That's what I'm going to be doing next, and thank you so much.
Thanks.